Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me again for another episode of Know Your Enemy. This week, I'm joined by Frankie Sheehy, the deputy sports editor over at the Vanderbilt Hustle. And today, we're going to break down the Gators' upcoming matchup against the Vanderbilt Commodores. Frankie, thank you for joining me.
No problem. Good to be here.
Oh, yeah. So, just going into my first question, the Commodores come in, 2-4, 0-2 in SEC play. But can you talk about just some of their strengths and weaknesses as a team?
Well, let's start with the strengths. We'll start a little positive. The biggest strength you want to watch out for with Vanderbilt is our core of wide receivers. That goes Will Shepard, Jaden McGowan, London Humphreys, plenty of other names you're going to need to watch out for on Saturday. Now, unfortunately, the other end of that is the quarterback situation, which right now is kind of a mess. With AJ Swan in a bit of injury limbo and Ken Seals looking like he's going to be the starter on Saturday. Uh, as for the rest of the team, the offensive line is struggling. The defense is okay. The secondary is kind of weak. But Vanderbilt can be a pesky team. You never can quite feel safe.
Nice. And kind of going into my next question, as you just mentioned it, Ken Seals, played last game. He's looking to be the starting quarterback going into this matchup against Florida. How has he looked, and what are your sort of expectations for his play Saturday?
Well, I'll preface that by saying that if Ken Seals plays on Saturday, Clark Lee in his press conference today was very ambiguous about whether it is going to be Ken Seals or whether AJ Swan's going to come back. But given that Ken Seals is a veteran now, he's senior. He's had a lot of experience within the program, even though most of it has been from the sidelines. I think he doesn't have quite the arm that AJ Swan does, but his target, he's a little bit of a safer quarterback. He doesn't take as big risks sometimes as Swan does, but he can be dangerous.
Nice. And just kind of going back then real quick, since you mentioned that Clark Lee was being a little ambiguous about who the starter could be, even though it might be Ken Seals. Can you talk about AJ Swan a little bit? Obviously, we believe this year he has 11 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken. So, what have you seen from him? And if he does happen to be the starter, despite possibly dealing with some injuries, what could he look like?
So AJ Swan can throw it deep. AJ Swan can when Vanderbilt is at that offense is at its best, which I think it was early in the game against Hawaii and actually later in the game against Alabama A&M, our two wins. AJ Swan can throw it deep. He can find these great receivers. You'll see great catches, explosive plays. The biggest worry with Swan is decision making. Too many interceptions, like you say 7 interceptions. He could be in double digits already, uh, and that's a big liability. Sometimes, unfortunately, uh, with Swan, he does have the arm, but he also got hurt. He hurt his elbow a few weeks ago against UNLV. He played still part of that game, played the Kentucky game, and then he finally sat out against Missouri. So we don't really know what his status is going to be, but he is someone to watch for.
Nice. And so, looking at this game, Florida suffered its first loss at Vanderbilt, I believe in more than 30 years. But that team looked a little bit different. As I've
Yeah,
mentioned, talking to you earlier, is you had Ray Davis. He ran all over Florida last year. You had Mike Wright. This very
yeah.
dynamic quarterback who was able to get some yardage against Florida. But looking at this team, what does Vanderbilt need to do to make it consecutive wins against the Gators?
Well, I'm honestly, it's going to be a lot harder this time than it was last time. Uh, Vanderbilt's offense last year was a lot more multidimensional than it is now. And I even think our secondary is weaker now than it was last year. Uh, so the secondary that was able to contain Anthony Richardson to I think 21 points.
Yeah,
Uh,
if I'm not
I don't
mistaken.
think they're going to be. I don't think it's going to be that way again. Vanderbilt's going to need to play a pretty much perfect game. No turnovers. I think we're going to be able to have the offense is going to need to be good. You're going to need to bring more of a rushing game. And you're going to have to stop the explosive plays. Now, whether they can do all of that when they haven't been able to do much of any of that in the last few weeks, it's going to be a tall task. But there is a roadmap there to pull off the upset.
Nice. And I think something that would be really important for this game, I think for Florida's end, is just being able to convert in the red zone. They've shown time and time again that they have no issues at getting down the field. They can move the ball. It's just, can they turn those red zone opportunities into touchdowns, or are they just going to settle for field goals? And I think if Vanderbilt can, force more field goals than, touchdowns, then, it's always going to give them a shot to win the ball game. So you've touched on the wide receiver core a little bit. Some of those guys is a strength of the team. Looking at the other side of the ball, who are some names to look out for who could, cause this run game some troubles and cause Graham Mertz some trouble?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest name you're going to watch for on our defense is CJ Taylor. He plays in that kind of linebacker, secondary kind of flexible role. He returned a few weeks ago, and he's really the heart and soul of our defense. I'm pretty sure he's one of the captains as well. We do have quite a few injuries in other spots on defense, so the line is a little bit weaker. The corners are a little bit weaker. We do have like a guy like Martel Height can be dangerous at corner, but Vanderbilt's defense is going to need to improve a lot. That's for sure.
Nice. And so, you've mentioned that, this is going to be probably a different game than last year, a lot of different factors. But, if it comes down to it where it's maybe a one possession game, two possession game, Vanderbilt's playing a really perfect game, and they're giving themselves a shot to win, what is the key factor? Like, what do you think has to happen, if you had to boil it down to maybe just one or two things that are going to be the difference maker that Vanderbilt gets their first SEC win this season?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say two things for sure would happen in any time Vanderbilt was to keep it close. One is can't have turnovers. I know I've said it again and again, but the real X factor is whoever's at quarterback, you gotta throw to guys who are wearing white on Saturday, and then the receivers have to be there. You're going to need to have a pretty much perfect game from them. I don't know that Vanderbilt's going to be able to win a game 17-14 or something like that. I think you're going to need to score at least 35 points, probably, as difficult as that may be. But that would have to be part of a path to an upset.
Nice. And going into my last two questions, real quick, as you talked about this wide receiver core, Florida's had a very young secondary. They've played really well, especially with freshmen and sophomore playing, starting, playing in key roles. But they've been able to really slow down other teams' passing attack. Maybe had a little trouble in the run game, but for the most part, they haven't, struggled against a quarterback really. So, how do you see that matchup going down? And who do you think has the advantage there?
On the ground, Vanderbilt hasn't really gone on the ground that much. Between Patrick Smith and Cedric Alexander, our two main running backs we've used so far, they haven't been used a whole lot. We've been trying to be a pass first offense. I think if the quarterback has a good day for Vanderbilt, the receivers could be really dangerous. I know that probably sounds really optimistic, but I think it is possible.
Nice. And so, going into my last question, just to, put you on the spot a little bit, how do you see this game playing out? And can you give me a final score prediction?
Sure. So we here at the Hustler, we know Vanderbilt's football's reputation. We know that every SEC team goes into their schedule and is like, when are we gonna get a free win? That's like we know that we're the program that you would expect to be. Understood. But Vanderbilt can be tricky. We had 2 SEC wins last year. I think this is probably this team is a step down from last year, but I would say optimistically we can keep it to like 14 points. So I would say my score prediction uh I'll go 35 to 21.
Nice. Yeah, and I
Sort
could
of.
definitely see that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I could definitely see that playing out.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, so again, thank you so much for speaking to me, breaking down this matchup.
For sure.
Answering
Anytime.
questions about the Vanderbilt Commodores. So before I let you go, where can people find you?
Oh, sure. Go to vanderbilthustler.com, our website, and you can follow me at Frankie Sheehy on Twitter.
Awesome. So again, this has been another episode of Know Your Enemy. Again, Frankie, thank you for joining me. It's been a pleasure. So
Thanks, Jackson.
thank you. Signing off.